Here in Kentucky, Representative David Osborne. Speaker, welcome. I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Larry. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Obviously, it didn't turn out to be the kind of general session you thought you might have when it started, obviously interrupted by COVID-19, but you still got some stuff done. What would you consider to be the highlights and maybe a couple of things that maybe you were surprised didn't get done?
Well, pretty much everything in everybody's lives has been turned on its ear by this coronavirus, and our session was no different. The session, I would have to say, probably the most important thing and the most consequential thing we did was get a budget. It was not the budget that we had hoped for. It was not the budget that we had begun the session planning for. When we came into session, we had consensus forecasting group numbers that showed that we were finally going to be able to do some things with the budget that we had hoped to be able to do. We were going to be able to restore some funding for some of the higher education cuts. We're going to be able to reward some of our hardworking public employees. And we passed our version of the budget the 1st of March. The Senate then passed theirs towards the end of March, and by that point in time, obviously, things had gone completely upside down, and we had to go back to the drawing board, reevaluate, and we ultimately did something somewhat unprecedented. Actually, it was completely unprecedented. We passed a one-year budget, and we passed it with the best numbers that we had, and that was the most pessimistic numbers that the consensus forecasting group had arrived at was the numbers we used. Not sure that anybody has any confidence that those numbers are reliable, but again, we had to budget to something, and those were the most pessimistic numbers we had. So we did that, but knowing we had no real trust in those numbers, we did just pass a one-year budget, and we will go back in January, hopefully with some better numbers, and try to make adjustments for both the year that we're going to be in, starting in July, as well as the year that we did not budget for.
Yeah, I don't know how you do a budget. I mean, you talk about using the most pessimistic numbers, but still, it's a best guess. It may turn out to not be true. It may be worse than they were projecting. Any chance at all at a special session at some point to maybe readjust the numbers once we get more data as to what the revenue might look like?
I think it depends on when we have a better picture for that, Larry. We gave the governor a great deal of flexibility with how he can move dollars around to make the budget work. If we have a more clear vision this fall or late summer as to what those numbers may look like, adjustments that we just absolutely have to make, I think it's certainly possible, and we will stand ready to do that. But we will be back in January, if not before, and that will be 6 months into the new fiscal year. So we will have the ability to tweak things as they come available. The really weird thing about this, we've had significant financial downturns in the past that we could deal with, and there was at least some way to predict what those recoveries were going to look like. In this particular case, when we have over 400,000 Kentuckians that have filed jobless claims in the last month, 26 million people across the country that have filed jobless claims, normally you would react to that in a certain way, but knowing that is a result of kind of a forced government shutdown of businesses, it's impossible to project how quickly we're going to be able to ramp the economy back up and how quickly the economy will rebound.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Kentucky does a budget every 2 years. Why not go to doing a new budget every single year? I mean, the times are different than when this was initially put into place, obviously. With the economies being much more complex now, why not go to a situation where we do a full state budget every year versus every 2 years?
It may be something that we discuss in greater detail now that we've done it. It's actually never been done before. Of course, that was traditionally linked to the fact that Kentucky only had biennial budgets. Biennial sessions. Now that we have annual sessions, it is something that we could certainly consider doing. I think that for planning purposes, I think that there is still some validity in doing 2-year budgets. But I do think as reactive as the economy is anymore, as global as this economy has become, and reactive to individual stimulus, it may be prudent. So I think it's something that we would absolutely will consider going forward.
We're talking with Speaker David Osborne about the General Assembly and specifically right now about the budget. We were talking with Senator Reggie Thomas back on Monday, and he was highlighting things that even though maybe the budget didn't do all the things that they were hoping to do, things like health care and education still got funded to the levels that people were wanting. I mean, would you consider that as maybe the greater accomplishment of the budget, despite having some restrictions and the unknowns out there, that education and budget still, education and healthcare still got budgeted appropriately?
Yeah, and again, I don't think it's what anybody necessarily wanted to do. I don't think there's anybody that is celebrating this budget, but I think it is a very thoughtful one. I think that it was one that was done in a bipartisan manner, in a bicameral manner. The House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats all kind of came together on this to put together a pretty responsible budget that did preserve some essential services. And right now it's important that essential government services do continue. And that doesn't mean that we've lost sight of some long-term visions, but our short-term goals have obviously changed.
Does it put even more pressure now on trying to come up with new revenue streams? I know that going into the 20 session, and we talked with Senator Damon Thayer at length about this on our weekly visits, about the need to generate new revenue streams, and of course he's fully supported sports betting. Do you think that coming up this coming January that might be a higher, not that it wasn't a higher priority before, I got sort of sidebarred with the coronavirus thing, but do you feel like that might become a real priority, is trying to develop new revenue streams to recoup some of the lost revenue because of businesses being shut down and tax revenue being down?
I think that clearly the best way to increase revenues is to continue to grow the economy. That aside, I do think that we're going to continue to have those conversations about sports betting and expanded gambling, as well as some other issues. I do believe I'm supportive of expanded gambling. Have been in my entire time in the legislature. I'm certainly supportive of the sports betting bill that was proposed this year. I do think that we will continue to have those conversations, especially in light of the declining revenues that we're going to see this year.
We're talking with the Speaker, David Osborne, about the general session. How long do you think that we will be closed down effectively? I know Governor Beshear, essential businesses are allowed to remain open. What should the role of legislators like yourself play in reopening the state? And do you have conversations with Governor Beshear, giving input and also him soliciting advice on what you guys are thinking as to what the state should do with regards to opening up the business, and the precautions of not doing it too soon, but also not waiting too long?
Our conversations with the governor have been pretty limited the last a couple weeks, but we do continue to give input. I think it's important that at some point in time we have to transition from at least talking about or switching the conversation from what is essential versus not essential to what is safe versus what is not safe. And I think that people have been very understanding and have been relatively compliant with the demands that have been placed on them. But at the same time, if we can start opening certain businesses that have illustrated an ability to operate in a safe manner, protecting the public, protecting their employees, I think that we need to start having those conversations. Whether those people are necessarily termed essential or not, I can assure you that the people that whose livelihoods depend upon them believe that those are essential. And if we can have those conversations about those being safe and safe to the public and safe for the public, then I think it's something that we just absolutely have to do.
Are you pleased with how Kentucky is expanding the testing? I mean, have we gotten expanded testing quick enough? I mean, are you pleased with that process?
The testing process has been something that we've really had no role in from the legislature. I know that the administration has moved as quickly as they possibly can, and that's something that the entire country has struggled with through this process in getting the testing, getting the private labs involved, and it has been slow. It's been frustrating, but I understand the reasons for it. It's been a difficult process to gear up all over the country. We are finally gearing up, and I think that obviously we need to be understanding of the fact that with the increase in testing, we're going to see an increased number of positives. Hopefully that doesn't mean we have a lot more increased number of very sick people. I think we're clearly going to see an increased number of positives.
We're talking with Speaker Osborne. I want to go back to the General Assembly again. Reflecting back on what you were able to accomplish, I want you to look at maybe some of the things that you hoped to get done that didn't get accomplished. What are some of the disappointments, and how do you I guess maybe correct those disappointments, or maybe solve the issue of them not getting through in the upcoming session in January? What are the things that didn't get done that's disappointing for you?
I think the top of that list for me has got to be what we gave the designation of House Bill 1 to this year, and that was a public assistance reform bill, and one that was not public assistance reform in its traditional sense, Larry. It was one that, oftentimes when we talk about public assistance reform, we talk about, throwing people off of public assistance and getting people off the government dole as quickly as possible. This one took a much more holistic look at public assistance and how we could make it work better for the people that are trying to get back into the workforce. We know that the number one reason that people that want to re-enter the workforce but don't is because of the fear of losing health care. And House Bill 1 set forth some very good criteria for both protecting the taxpayer, reducing fraud, but also giving flexibility to public dollars that will allow people to get back into the workforce, whether that be increasing child care, whether that be providing gap insurance for people that will no longer qualify for Medicaid. A lot of things that are real impediments. Even though it was different, it was not without controversy, and certainly there was a lot of discussion, a lot of involvement of stakeholders. We finally pulled the plug on that toward the end of session, just because when we had to close the Capitol down to public access, we felt like that some of the matters that really demanded more public input, that really demanded allowing access to those committee hearings, to let everybody air their concerns, the problems that they have with those particular pieces of legislation. We just didn't feel like that we could move forward with those under these circumstances, especially in the case of House Bill 1. Obviously, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services is under incredible pressure right now, and to throw a bunch of new changes at them just didn't seem to be prudent. But that was the work of a year of work group meetings and public hearings that we had. Felt like it was a very well conceived and very well vetted bill, but at the end we just felt like we had to pull the plug on it. It doesn't mean that the work is all for nothing. We reached a very good spot on that bill. Had a lot of buy-in from the special interest groups, from the advocacy groups, and I think we'll pick that up in January and run with it again.
I was a little surprised that we didn't hear more about pensions. And in fact, going into it, I thought that would be one of the major topics of discussion. I'm not saying it didn't get addressed, but we didn't hear a lot about that. Are you comfortable with where we are with regards to pensions and our previous, reforms that have been put in place? Are they working? Kind of assess where we are with pensions. And is that something that's still a topic that's going to have to be addressed early and often in the upcoming January session?
It is. I think that we're about to see that the stress that the pensions are causing is only gotten worse in this financial downturn. Clearly, obviously, we're going to have continue to have the conversation about pensions just because it continues to devour such a huge portion of our budget. Doesn't mean that we don't need to pay it. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay it. But as we continue to make difficult decisions regarding budget, I think that we have to acknowledge that we have to pay the bills that are due on our pensions, and I think that means that we need to talk about additional reforms, and we need to do that in an open manner and do it in a thoughtful manner that will allow us to satisfy some of the concerns maybe that weren't addressed in the past, but also understand that we need to protect the taxpayer as well.
Last question, though. Do you believe that the pensions are healthier today than they were a year ago? I mean, is it in decline, or is it holding? I guess, is it flatlining, or is it better? Is it improved? Where do you think stand today?
Prior to this most recent economic upheaval that we're in the middle of right now, I think that the general health of the pensions was improving, and that is simply a fact of the that we put in 2016. We put $2.2 billion into pensions. In 2018, we put $3.3 billion into pensions. We increased that again this year. It was simply a matter of the amount of money that we were putting in. For the first time in 2 decades, we were funding the pensions like they were supposed to be funded. So I think that, yes, clearly the overall health of the pensions was and is improving. And I think that funding is obviously the key to that.
Speaker, I appreciate the time as always. Thank you. I look forward to having you back on again soon.
Absolutely, Larry. Pleasure to be with you. Look forward to catching up with you again soon.